Welcome to today's briefing on the 2023 Cost of Service Study and the 2024 to 2026 GMC update. We're going to be getting started shortly. Please continue to stand by. 1.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the briefing on the 2023 Cost of Service Study and 2024 through 2026 GMC update. My name is Elena Coppold-Alford, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs here at the California ISO, and I'll be facilitating today's meeting. I'm also joined by April Gordon, Director of Financial Planning and Procurement, and Ryan Sagazio, VP and Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer and Finance. Before we get started, I have a couple housekeeping reminders to go through. So this call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. The meeting is structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives, but please keep comments professional and respectful, and please try to be brief and refrain from what's already been said so we can manage our time efficiently. To raise your hand if you connected to audio through your computer or use the call me option, select the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. If you dialed into the meeting, you can hit #2 to enter the question queue. And then please remember to state your name and affiliation before making your comments. If you need technical assistance during the meeting, please send a chat to the event producer. Today's event producer is Candace. And you may also send your question via chat to either myself, Elena Coppold-Alford, or all panelists. On the agenda today, we have the Cost of Service Study overview, the summary of 2023 Cost of Service Study results, other changes, planned tariff amendments, key calendar dates and next steps, and then wrapping up with stakeholder feedback and discussion. And I'm going to hand it over to April Gordon.
Actually, let me jump in real quick and kind of give a quick overview before we turn it over to April. We'll talk about the details. First of all, welcome and thank you for all that have joined us today. For many of you, this may be your first cost of service study, or it's at least a refresher for the rest of you. We only do this every 3 years, so it's been a few years since we've last done this process. You saw a very large paper got posted last week with all kinds of data. It really just represents a summary of the overall study that's been done, and April will kind of walk you through some of the key elements of it today. You know, at a very high level, the cost of service study is essentially, you know, a study where we determine really where the ISO costs are being generated from, and then how we allocate those costs to really our 4 lines of business. And that's really the 2 big ones being market services and system operations, and then to a lesser extent, CRR services and RC services. WIM is in there as well, but it's embedded in the market services and system operations charge. The easiest part of today, or the easiest news to digest, is the core cost of service study really indicates little to no change in our cost allocations, and April will kind of walk you through that. So just some minor tariff amendments to update the formulas that are in there, but really no big changes. Most of the tariff amendments that come out of today or this process will come from really 3 unique areas to this year's study. And actually all of the 3 don't take effect until 2025, which is when EDAM is scheduled to launch. And they're all kind of related to the launch of the EDAM market. The 3, in summary, we're going to bifurcate the system operations charge into 2 charges. There'll be a system operations charge related to BAA services and a system operations charge related to real-time dispatch. There's no financial impact to any market participant of this change. It's simply taking 1 charge code and turning it into 2. The cost allocation principles will be identical as they are now. We're really doing this to simplify internally how we collect that charge. Second item is an increase to the revenue requirement cap. The tariff kind of gives us a revenue requirement maximum that we set, and as long as the formulaic rates do not exceed that cap requirement, we don't have to file a 205 filing with FERC to approve next year's revenue requirement. We typically have used the cost of service study to assess where that cap needs to be. However, the last time it was increased in 2015 to $202 million, I think our requirement at that point was about 198 million, so we had a little bit more room to grow. Since then, with the development of some of the other revenues that have come in over the last 10 years, predominantly WEIM and RC, the growth in those revenues exceeded the growth in our costs, and so we have not had to touch the cap. We are now very close to that cap. We do think that next year we can still build the revenue requirement at that $202 million level, but with mainly due to an accounting change in 2025 on how we collect EDAM, we need to have a significant increase in that cap. April will walk you through this. Even though the cap number goes up, essentially our bottom line number goes up, there's a bigger increase in the volumes coming through the charge code, so everybody's share of that cost goes down and it leads to lower rates. So April will show you that. And then finally, the third element of this initiative is our EDAM transitional ramp-in model that'll be in place during the first 4 years of EDAM. And essentially this is really designed to align kind of the growing benefits with EDAM as scale builds during those first few years, to align those with the EDAM entity's cost. And it really also is to encourage potential participants to join sooner during that first few year period versus waiting. So April has some details on that, and at this point I'll turn it over to April.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Good morning, everyone. I'll go ahead and walk you through what the cost of service study is, go over the results, and then we'll take it through to the other items that Ryan mentioned. So to kick it off, just to give you a quick overview of the cost of service study, what we're doing with the study is really we are analyzing the amount of time and effort it takes our organization to provide the services that we do to our customers. By doing so, we can appropriately allocate out the amount of cost category percentages to those core lines of services. We call them the grid management charges. Those core services are system operations, market services, and CRR services. The illustration that you have in front of you is very simplified, but it walks you through at a high level how we use the percentages to allocate out to the cost categories in order to determine what the rates are going into any given year. Next slide, please. Some of the steps involved in putting together the cost of service study, the first step is really maintaining our business processes. At this level, we are constantly evaluating the processes that we have within the organization that shows the work from bid to bill, end to end, for all the different employees working on their services. We collect the hours that are processed as part of time cards. The hours are recorded against processes, project codes, and then also task codes. To give you a sense of how many task codes we're looking at for 2022's data that was used for the study, we had about 112 different tasks. The triennial cost of service study itself is really looking at mapping out the direct versus indirect costs. We're calculating out the cost category allocations percentages, and then we're reassessing the supplemental service charges, the fees, and the rates. These services would be WEIM. We're looking at the reliability coordinator percentage. We're also looking at the transmission ownership rights. We're looking at the California-Oregon intertie and other supplemental services such as the schedule coordinator ID fee as a monthly fee. These are just an example, but these are the elements that we're looking at as well. Now, what we do with this information as part of the study is we use it, as I mentioned, going into each year's annual revenue requirement. We allocate out those percentages to those cores. They're listed, the market services, system operations, CRRs, and then also the reliability coordinator services to determine what the rates will be going into the year. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, we constantly update our processes and then also our level 2 tasks. This year we had 112 different tasks amongst the 9 process codes that we have. The difference between the direct and indirect really have to do with the amount of effort those process efforts, sorry for the redundancy, really directly impact those core services. The first 8 processes listed on the top part of this graph are considered direct operating costs because they directly impact those core services. Develop markets goes into market services. Manage market and grid is more of a system operations and a market element. So this is just an example. Now, the indirect operating costs are those that really support the direct operating costs. In this case, there's only one process code that is purely indirect, and that would be managed human capabilities. Now, in the study, we took it a bit further and we broke these process tasks apart between what would be considered a corporate services function versus an operational function. Next slide, please. Now, the cost of service study this year was a bit different than last in that we took a look at it in 2 different scenarios. The first scenario would be what would be considered pre-extended day-ahead market, EDAM, and that would be impacting 2024. The second scenario would be EDAM, and that would be impacting 25 and 26. Now, there's a lot of moving targets within this cost of service study, so the illustration that you have on this slide is really just to give you a high-level understanding of what's changing and what's not changing. So to take it from the top down, the grid management charges, we have no change to the percentage allocations for market services, system operations, and CRR services in 2024. Now in 2025, during EDAM, we will see a change, and that really has to do with the bifurcation of the system operations, right, between system operations real-time dispatch and then system operations balance authority area services. And that would be going from a 49% allocation for system operations to a 23-26% split between real-time dispatch and balance authority area services. Now, moving on to the next category, the Western Energy Imbalance Market. Here, we're going to see a change going into 2024. Our real-time market element is going to be increasing by 2%. And then going into the EDAM time period, 25 and 26, we are seeing it reduced by less than 1%. Now, the real-time dispatch, we're seeing a higher shift, an 8% decrease from 50% to 42%. Now, the driver of this decrease really has to do with the additional services that are going into the balance authority area services portion of the system operations rate. Apologies, that's a mouthful. Basically, what we're doing is we're seeing a lot more time spent on summer preparations as well as transmission planning, and that's shifting the effort away. In regards to the Reliability Coordinator West, RC West, we are seeing about a percentage shift here, and that has to do with more of the services going into the transmission planning as well as to the summer readiness. Now, in regards to the supplemental fees, we are not, the study does not support a change in what we would consider to be other revenue, and now these would be offsets to the GMC revenue requirement. This would be similar to, let's say, the California-Oregon intertie fee is a great example of what the other revenue would be. Now, in regards to the miscellaneous fees, those fees that are collected below the line as part of the regular GMC collections, we are seeing a shift in our transmission ownership right charge from 18 cents to 32 cents in 2024. And then again, as we're seeing a slight 1 cent increase from 25 and 26. The main driver behind this increase has to do with, one, the additional costs associated with this charge, but also the reduction in volumes that we saw in 2022, which is the driver behind this. All told, the TOR charge is going from 18 cents in 2023 to 33 cents in 2026. Next slide, please. The other element of this cost of service study is the EDM transitional load ramp-in. With the load ramp-in, what we're proposing is a fixed percentage ramp-in over the initial 4 periods of EDM. Now, the ramp-in would only apply to the load volumes, and so as to avoid any competitive advantage to suppliers in the market. The illustration that you have on this slide does a perfect job of showing you what we're proposing on the ramp-in. 2025, if you have a customer coming in 2025, they'll see a 5% ramp-in of their load starting in year 1, and then 100% of their supply. Now, this is fixed for the year that's being offered. It's not for participation years. So what that means is if we had an entity join in 2027, their load ramp-in would be 50%, not 5%, but they would have 100% ramp-in of their supply. Now, the reason we set this, the 5% in 2025 is so that we would essentially be collecting what we would be collecting from that entity under WEIM, but under EDM. Now, even despite this ramp-in, all customers that pay market services and what would now be the real-time dispatch charge will benefit from the additional volume starting in year 1, regardless of the ramp-in, because we're going to be using the incremental day-ahead volumes to help establish those rates, which will help bring those rates down lower. Next slide, please. Now, as Ryan mentioned, the other element with this cost of service study is the proposal to increase our revenue requirement cap from $202 million to $245 million in the year 2025. Now, this has to do with really the introduction of EDM and how we're going to be capturing that revenue for EDM. So that's the accounting change. But it also takes into consideration the cost of inflation as well as the additional positions that have been added since the last revenue requirement cap in 2015, which was nearly 11 years ago from when it was established to when we're actually asking for it to be implemented in 2025. Now, I'll walk you through the categories for the revenue requirement, actual to forecast, to give you an understanding of why those category amounts are changing. Now, and then this is really focused in on the other revenues and adjustments area. The operations and maintenance budget that you see is giving you an estimate of what we expect those budgets to be set at, given our trajectory of headcount as well as for inflationary growth. The debt service and cash funded portion. Now, in the 2021 through 2023, we had cash funded capital coming in closer to about 25 million-ish, and then the debt service was fixed. Now, in 2024 through 2026, where once again, the debt service is going to be fixed, but the cash funded capital is going to be set closer to about 15 million, give or take, given that year's needs. And that's where you're going to see that level off between 20.7 million to 29.7 million. Now, in other revenues and adjustments, here we're seeing a big shift. Keep in mind, other revenues include elements as WEIM, administrative fees, the nodal pricing model, that's the gateway service fee that Pacific Core is paying currently. It also includes interest income and California Oregon Intertie as an example, as well as our forecasting fees. Now, with the bifurcation of the system operations rate, when that happens in 2025, we're going to see a portion of that, what we would have collected for WEIM administrative fees, be collected below the line. So that's going to be, that traditional revenue offset is going to be taken away away from other revenues and collected below the line. So that's going to explain some of that decrease in revenue. But then we're also going to be seeing the nodal pricing model fee go away in 2025 when Pacific Core joins EDM. So that's another reason why we're seeing that decrease in that category. Now, in regards to the adjustments, we've had some pretty high operating cost reserve adjustments from 2021 through 2023, and that has to do primarily with the pandemic impacts. During the pandemic, we saw a fair amount of budget surplus because of the discretionary items we weren't allowed to spend due to travel moratoriums and what have you, as well as due to some vacancies that we held. But under normal circumstances, we're not expecting those large credits as we saw in 21 through 23. So we're projecting a more realistic operating cost reserve adjustment starting in 25 and 26. And that is the last component that's going to be drawing down that other revenues and adjustment category from 70.7 million in 2024 to about 46.8 million in 2026. So you'll see that our total GMC revenue requirement is increasing because of the reduction of those offsets. However, the other element here is the measured demand in terawatt hours is going to be increasing, especially as EDAM starts to becoming more prevalent in 2025. Here we're going to see our revenue requirement at 241.6. If we were to take a pro forma bundled approach of a cost per megawatt hour, if you will, that would be going from about 83.2 cents in 2024 to about 70.9 cents in 2025. And as EDAM grows and as more of those day-ahead volumes come into the market, we're going to have a higher measured demand, which is going to help decrease those rates even more. Those pro forma bundled cost per megawatt hour rates decrease. And with that, I take you to the next slide. Here, I'll walk you through some of the tariff amendments that we're anticipating in the next stakeholder meeting, which is August 15th. Sorry about that. That's a mistake we'll need to correct. We're going to be updating the percentage changes and fee updates as part of the core cost of service study efforts. We're also going to be introducing language to bifurcate the system operations charge between the real-time dispatch and the balance authority area services. And we're also going to propose the EDAM transitional ramp-in of load volumes during the period of 25 through 28. Finally, we will be proposing the language to increase the revenue requirement cap effective in 1/1/2025 to 245 million, and then again 250 million as of 1/1/2026. Next slide, please. Here, I'll walk you through some of the key calendar dates and next steps. We posted the draft of the cost of service study back on July 5th. I hope you all had a chance to read it. Quite interesting. Our first stakeholder meeting is today. If our comments are due from stakeholders on July 19th, we will be posting the draft final version of the cost of service study on August 1st, with a follow-up stakeholder meeting on August 15th, where we will be walking through some of the tariff amendments in the language. August 30th, those stakeholder comments are due. We'll be presenting the cost of service study update and the proposed changes to the Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body on September 19th. These will be decisional items for the EDM transitional ramp-in approach, as well as for the bifurcation of the system operations charge and for the revenue requirement cap, but more informational items for the core GMC update, or I'm sorry, cost of service updates, such as the TOR change and the WEIM percentage changes. Our deadline to file the tariff amendments with FERC is on October 5th. That date is to allow us to have the results back for us to use the revised percentages going into the 2024 revenue requirement, which will be presented to the board on December 12th as a decisional item. Next slide, please. At this moment, I'll go ahead and hand it back over to you, Elena, to take it through.
Hello. So as April mentioned, the comments are due by the end of the day, actually by 5 p.m. on July 19th, and you could submit them to that link at the bottom of this page. This is also where you're going to find the papers and this presentation and the video that will get posted after the fact. If you have any questions, you can email isostakeholderaffairs@kaiso.com. Is there any questions? Okay, I've got a question from Kyle Navis.
Kyle Novice from the Public Advocate's Office. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Is this the appropriate time to ask like content policy questions related to some of these factors?
Content, if you can't answer it, then we'll go ahead and ask you to submit it as a question. Okay.
Well, so just my basic question is around this EDAM kind of ramping in of the charges for new participants. And yeah, I mean, a few questions about that. One is, it looks like a nice early bird sale to attract new participants to get into EDAM. And my one question is there precedent for this kind of ramping in of the charges from the EIM market? And then another part of that is, I mean, it looks like it might be discriminatory against California ratepayers because they would be the ones paying for the extra costs that would not be attributed to or recovered from new EDAM participants. So what makes you confident that would pass muster at FERC? And then third question related to that is just, have you considered other approaches which might help smooth some of those charges, maybe something like a deferred payment plan for new participants?
Sure. Okay, Kyle, that was about 3 different elements that we can go through. The question in regards to precedent, I'm not aware of there being precedent. I'll go ahead and leave that question to our legal team to address. Then the next one was the next question that you had to do with you made a comment about an early bird special, and that we can go ahead and address that after our legal team addresses your first question. And then, I'm sorry, remind me the other question that you had?
Yes, so there were, the 2 others were, how are you confident this wouldn't maybe be seen as discriminatory rate making by FERC? And then the others, are there other alternatives to consider, like maybe a deferred payment plan?
Oh, okay.
Hey, April, let me address Kyle briefly. I think, Kyle, that, there is obviously this regulatory risk in anything, we submit to FERC. We believe this is kind of a just and reasonable approach because as we learned with WEIM, the benefits to those participants really take some time to accrue. One, there's a learning curve as they come into the market, but 2, it's until that market generates some scale as more entities come in, they really don't receive the same benefits. And so part of this, again, was designed to try to maybe scale in their costs so that it is in conjunction with how their benefits will scale as well. And then again, the other reason was to really incentivize more early adoption. The impact to California, though, is immediate, right? The moment any entity comes in, and the cost of service study right now just assumes Pacific Corp because they're the only ones that have now publicly announced that they have an interest in joining on day one. If just 1 megawatt of volume comes through the market, it lowers the cost to California payers immediately. Obviously, Pacific Corp is the largest in kind of the West, and so there'll be significant volume increases, which will lower the rates. And as April had a slide, I think, that showed kind of our projections of where our overall cost per megawatt goes down. So really from day one, there is benefit to California ratepayers, and then if it incentivizes quicker adoption, there's even more benefit than we're currently presenting in the paper.
Okay, I mean, I hear you. Wouldn't those same, or could you help me understand why those same benefits wouldn't also accrue to Pacific Corp's ratepayers from day one?
Well, there is going to be some benefits to Pacific Corp ratepayers day one, and again, they're going to have, and that's why there's going to be significant costs for PacifiCorp on day one. There's just this kind of ramping in of their load volumes only, as April explained, and really a lot of volume comes in through the supply side. So I believe that, I think April has, I don't think we had it in the presentation, but in the paper, there's a slide that shows really the forecasted total volumes that PacifiCorp or a year one entity would be paying. And it's something like 70+%, 71%, I believe, of their total volume they'll be being charged on. So there is a lot of cost to them initially, and that obviously equates to benefits to their stakeholders day one.
Right. Yeah. I've reviewed that table, and I mean, I think in the first year we're talking about $14 million in difference. So thanks for including that table. It is helpful. And then, yeah, the last question, could you address that on? Are there other alternatives, like maybe a deferred payment plan of some sort that might be possible?
Well, I won't dive down too far into the world of accounting, but that starts to erode the intent of kind of scaling in their costs to benefits. If we have some sort of a deferred payment or a kind of an accrual of a liability down the road, then accounting rules are going to require them to book that immediately. And so then ultimately their costs become really their full 100% costs in year one, at least on accounting paper. And then that may, again, erode kind of the value of joining the EDAM while the market is waiting for scale to develop.
All right. Thanks very much.
Yep.
Bill, would you like to contribute to the other question on precedents?
Yeah, sure. There's ample precedent and we were obviously trying to be very aware of it in crafting this rate structure, because, yeah, I mean, there's precedent on both sides where entities have done it like we've done it to structure it correctly to incentivize, a reduction in costs for all ratepayers, and that the costs match the benefits. And then there's precedent where people have done it inappropriately, where it's clearly just a discount rate to the benefit of new entrants. And that's what we've tried to avoid here. But certainly in the natural gas and electric context, that there's always precedent for structuring a rate this way, as we've done, to try to bring costs down for everyone. But we're certainly going to be mindful of that, and certainly happy to work with stakeholders as we go through. But we're, obviously we're confident in taking this to FERC, otherwise we wouldn't have proposed it.
Okay. We have one more hand raised from Steve.
Steve Keen from Southern California Edison. This is a simple question, but you show it set for years 25 through 30. I'm wondering, is it actually for those years, or is it for the first year that EDAM, let's start with the first year of EDAM, just, if EDAM were to be delayed?
Yeah, so if EDAM were to be delayed, it would push back until EDAM kicked off.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I would just add that, the way the tariff will be structured is that, we're going in with one currently effective rate, and, the initial set of tariff provisions will spell it out in this way, because it's not based on when anyone joins, it's based on when it benefits the CAISO the most and ratepayers the most. So it'll be, the tariff will say in 2024, it'll be X, in 2025, it'll be Y. If there is a big push where things get delayed, we might have to come back in and just slide those dates back, but the structure would remain the same.
Okay, and we currently have no other questions in the chat or any hands raised. Thank you everyone for your participation. We look forward to seeing your comments.
Thank you.